Let's take a look now at the theological ramifications of Psalm 139, because David describes here a God that is so different from those of the ancient world that he really defies comparison. The gods of the ancient world were regional, that is, they only had authority over certain geographical areas and cultures. The gods of the ancient world all had some kind of origin story. They all came from somewhere, and something or someone, but God has no beginning or end. Note the things that this psalm affirms about God: that he knows everything, that he is everywhere at all times, that he is the intimate creator and engineer of life, and he is eternal. All of these are clearly affirmed in the psalm. To summarize in theological terms, we'd say he is omniscient, he knows all, he's omnipresent, he is present everywhere, he is omnipotent, he is all-powerful, manifested by his ability to create life and to form it and design it, and he is eternal in nature. The experience of God's presence is something that is profound, and it is found throughout all of Scripture, beginning in Genesis 2, where Adam and Eve walk with God in the garden. Genesis 28 is one of my favorite pictures of God's presence. This is of Jacob as he is on the run. He has this experience of seeing angels ascending and descending a stairway to heaven. He says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." And he calls the place Beth-El, house of God. And how true it is often that we are not aware of God's presence. Jacob had his eyes opened and saw the presence of God and experienced it in that moment. The Psalms are abundant with evidence that God is immanent, not only here in Psalm 139, but Psalm 73, "I'm always with you, you hold me by my right hand." There's a powerful metaphor of God's physical contact. Psalm 145, "Yahweh is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. Yahweh is close to the broken heart." Psalm 34:18. God is immanent, but he is also transcendent. Abundant verses tell us that he is beyond. He is from everlasting to everlasting. That is, he is beyond time. Who is like Yahweh, who stoops down to look on the heavens and the earth. He is beyond space, so he has to stoop down to enter into our world. And finally, he is beyond knowing. His greatness no one can fathom. Beyond time, beyond space, beyond knowing, God is transcendent. This is echoed in the New Testament in 1 Timothy. "Now to the King, eternal, time, immortal, invisible, the only God, who alone is immortal, who lives in unapproachable light, whom no one has seen or can see, beyond knowing." This is our God, immanent and transcendent. How do we explain this paradox? Because those two seem to be in contradiction, that God is both near and far. He is both beyond and intimate. And the way that I've come to be able to visualize this has been helped greatly by a book by Hugh Ross called Beyond the Cosmos, and another book, a much older book by Edwin Abbott called Flatland. And what these two authors describe for us is this reality, is that we live in a world of 4 dimensions. There are 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal dimensions. The spatial dimensions would be length, width, and then depth. Of course, I can't portray that on a 2-dimensional screen, but you know what I'm talking about. And then time, as we experience it, is linear. That is, it moves in a line in one direction, and it is at a constant rate. We can't speed up time. We can't slow down time. We can't skip ahead. You may want to skip ahead to the end of this course, but you can't, because we are stuck on this timeline. For us, it has a beginning and an end. That for us would be our birth and our death. So how can we conceptualize of a world with more than 4 dimensions? We are bound by this world of 4 dimensions, so how do we perceive of it? Well, if we think about it, we can conceive of a world with 3 spatial dimensions using only 2. So for example, in the world of music, here is a 2-dimensional representation of sound. But as a musician, I know and I can create what I see in 2 dimensions in 3 dimensions. The experience of sound requires 3 dimensions. So I read this and go, dun, 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 dun. Right? So 2 dimensions can yield 3. Likewise, an architect will make a 2-dimensional representation of a space, and we can visualize with our imagination what the 3-dimensional application of that would be. So I want you to do a little exercise right now. Take out a piece of paper, and I want you to draw some stick figures like these. And what you are creating here on a sheet of paper is a 2-dimensional world. It only has length and width. There is no depth. It's only 2 dimensions. And as you're drawing this, and feel free to hit pause and get paper and pencil, because this is important that you do this. And as you're drawing this, realize that you are taking the role of a creator. You, as a 3-dimensional being, are creating a 2-dimensional world. The boundary of your world is this sheet of paper. So it has its limits. It has its spatial material limits. And notice as you draw your stick figures that this is quite easy for you to do. You're not breaking any laws of physics in creating these stick figures. Yet if you were to take the perspective of one of your stick figures, if they were to be animated, you might imagine them moving in front of you. And if they could have some kind of perception, what they would see is that things are appearing out of nothing. So say, for example, you decide, I want to add the sun, or I want to add some stars, and you can do that. And to your screen people that you've created, these things appear to come out of nowhere, and they might describe them as a miracle. And they might look at you might have a storm, well, and they would experience that as something unexplainable, what you might call a miracle. And if you think about it, what you know about your creation, well, it's everything. You know everything about your creation because you can see them either side. You could take that piece of paper and you could look right through it and know everything about your creation, of course, because you made everything. You could also be very intimate with your creation. You could touch them. I mean, you can literally touch the paper that you've drawn on, just as I can touch the screen. So you are both immanent, very near to your creation, and yet you are also quite beyond it. As a 3-dimensional being, you are far superior to their 2-dimensional little bodies. Would your creation know that you exist? Well, they might come to the conclusion that, hey, I don't know how we got here. There must have been someone or something that put us here. There must be a creator, and he must be good because this is a good world. What if you entered their world? What if you went beyond just looking at them, touching the surface, but actually entered their world? If you were to take your finger and enter your world, they would experience it first as the point of your finger enters their world as just as a singular dot. But then as you place your finger deeper into their world, they would sense that dot getting larger. And we would call this incarnation, because you are taking all that you are in your 3-dimensionalness and inserting it into a 2-dimensional world. You are still all that you are. Nothing about you has changed, but all that you are cannot fit into a 2-dimensional world. Just a slice of it. In the same way, Jesus emptied himself, Philippians says, and entered into our world, took the very nature of humanity, and yet was still fully God while being fully human. Now, what if I took 3 fingers and inserted them into this world? They would appear as 3 separate dots or beings, and yet I'm clearly one person. This is a way to perceive of the Trinity, that God has entered our world in different ways, different manifestations, but he is still completely one being. So there's another example for you of immanence, of nearness. Well, what if God relates to us as we related to the 2-dimensional world that we just created? Point is, he would know everything about us just as we know everything about our little stick figures. we would be everywhere. We'd be completely around this piece of paper and the stick figures on them, and we would be all powerful. We could do anything we wanted to. We could create, we could destroy, and we would not be violating any laws of physics to do so. This would help us to describe God's omniscience. Now, He knows everything about us, how He is with us at all times and everywhere, and how He is all-powerful over us. This is His transcendence. God is both immanent and transcendent. Finally, how does this relate to time, God's extra dimensionality and time? We said that we experience time in one dimension. The psalmist said the length of our days is 70, maybe 80 at best. Now, we believe by faith that we will experience time in an eternal way as well. The psalmist alludes to this. You'll take me into glory. My body will live in hope. I will experience eternal pleasures at your right hand. This is our future experience of time, where it is still one-dimensional, but it is without limit. Time as God experiences is that no beginning or end, from everlasting to everlasting. And time as God experiences it in two dimensions is that God has this ability to intersect the timeline perpendicularly, so that what may seem like 1,000 years to us is just a day to Him as He intersects the world. We've explained that this is how God can hear the prayers of billions of people simultaneously. Those arrows represent our lives, our prayers, as they intersect God's timeline. So He can stop and pay attention every second of every moment of everyone's life without billions of years passing. He can also atone for the sins through Jesus, the sins of all people, one time in 6 hours on the cross, due to this extra dimensionality of ability that He has. This is God's immanence as it relates to time. He can be very near to us. What about God's transcendence? So time as God experiences it is this. God is outside of time. He sees it all in one glance. This third dimension of time that's depicted here by the dotted line, it must be a reality because God existed before time began, so He must be outside of time. And thus, He sees our entire life in one glance, as the psalmist said. He sees us from birth to death, our entire life in one glance. Likewise, He stands outside of human history and even the history of the universe, from creation to the new creation of a new heaven and a new earth. He exists outside of that. He sees it all. The psalmist alluded to that in Psalm 90. Before the mountains were born, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. The New Testament echoes this as well. Paul writes, He chose us in Him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in His sight. So before creation, God even saw us standing outside of time, as He is able to do. So for that very reason, Paul says, I was shown mercy so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display His unlimited patience as an example for those who would believe in Him and receive eternal life. His unlimited patience. So even before I was born, God was already knowing me and expressing His unlimited patience, because God is beyond time. This is a picture of His transcendence. The good news is that we will experience extra dimensionality in the future. 1 Corinthians 15 says we'll have a spiritual body that's imperishable, not bound by the limits of space and time. It's raised in glory, raised in power. The flesh and blood can't inherit this kingdom, nor can the perishable, but the imperishable can. In a flash, we'll be changed. We'll be clothed, the imperishable, the mortal, with immortality. As 1 John says, we will be like Jesus, for we shall see Him as He is. God operates in multiple dimensions of time and space, and it seems to me that when we are changed in the new heavens and new earth, that we will share in some of God's extra dimensional abilities. This is a way of explaining and understanding the theology of Psalm 139, God's transcendence and his immanence, his omnipresence, his omniscience, and his omnipotence.